Joe, do you know how to do that?
I do not.
Hey,
I think
I saw his hand pop up.
I think that means that we're good, guys. I think he raised his hand as an acknowledgement that it's good. Yes, we are live, according to Steve.
Okay, perfect. Hey, Rebecca, how are you? Well, good morning, everyone. Good. And welcome, everyone. After the last study session, I just had an extensive amount of questions I had because IPL is such an incredibly important item to talk about. I don't know if there's any other council members on here. Councilmember Fears, would you like to have any opening statements?
No, I asked most of my questions, but I do probably have a couple. I'll be pretty short in any questions I have, and may not stay on the whole time depending on how long we go.
Perfect. Well, glad to have you here. I think it's important we ask questions on this. And Heather and Donald, did you receive copies of the questions I had from Zach this morning?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So that gives you a sense of it. We're not going to do all of them, but that was kind of the sense I wanted to go over.
Sure.
And so there was a couple of questions. I think this is important one right off the bat is, and you talked about this the other day, but I really want to kind of delve into it. What are the financial impacts if the coal plants Nebraska City 2 and Iatan are closed early due to environmental regulations, and what kind of an impact would that make on our financials? Or is that something I should have the finance department look at, or Joe and his staff look at? What's your best recommendation there, and kind of what's your overview? What would be impact for us if those coal contracts were retired early?
Well, the biggest impact we see that it would close early. One, due perhaps to the cost of environmental regulations and or the conditions in the marketplace. And the impact on the City of Independence is that you would have to continue paying basically the construction debt, even though the plants are shut down. In the case of Nebraska City 2, you pay more in O&M right now than you pay in principal and interest. So on the face of it, you would be saving money, but then you have to go out and find an additional 50 megawatts of capacity to meet your resource adequacy requirement. And based on what market conditions are today, that would give you a sense of how costly it would be to the city to on the delta there for Iatan or for Nebraska City 2, whether you're actually going to save a nominal amount of money or it's going to cost you more money. In the case of Iatan 2, you pay more in principal and interest than you do in O&M. So when we calculated the numbers, there was still about $1 million a year outstanding in payments for Iatan 2, and then you have to go out and find an additional 53 megawatts of capacity to meet your adequate resource. I think we would recommend is that you get a sense of where capacity costs are in the marketplace today, and then plan around those numbers as to the impact on the finances for these plants shutting down early, as if it were today, and then track it at some incremental basis, be it 6 months, be it a year, to understand what that is. I think it would be also important in the case of Iatan 2 to get a sense of what the decommissioning liability is. There's a debt service reserve fund for Iatan 2. And when we asked that question, they said those funds perhaps could be applied to decommissioning costs, but maybe try and get your arms around what that is going to cost. And then a third item I would say is, if Iatan 2, if these owners decide to invest in the equipment to comply with environmental regulations, what is the anticipated capital cost and what is the impact on the City of Independence? So those would be my 3 recommendations.
Okay, so if I'm just to understand it in layman's terms, we'd have to have it come up with another basically 3 megawatts of capacity if those were taken off the market. And so we'd have to replace that, plus cover the debt load on that if we were to go forward.
Correct.
Okay. And so your recommendation is that, you know, we get kind of a financial analysis done on that to see what impact that's going to make on the financials of IPL going forward.
Well, and also, if I might interrupt, correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but ITAN is about what, 8.9 million a year in debt service.
Young.
And
kind of interesting.
NC2 is about 1.2 to 2 million a year. And so the impact really depends on when that happens. You know, the further out, if it's 10 years from now, you know, it minimizes it. But one of the things we talked about in the report potentially to help address some of the risk, and this may not be a good time for that, is to talk to your financial advisors and look at the potential of issuing debt to pay this off early and setting an escrow where you know, the present value of those payments are going to be less, and you may be able to issue it at a discount. It depends on the interest rates and whether that makes sense or not. You can escrow it and use that to pay off your debt and have a margin of savings between what it would be versus what you actually end up paying, to give you a little bit of room to purchase that additional capacity. But it's significant. And I think those, correct me, Don, I think those are the numbers that I recall is IATAN was pretty significant as far as the debt service was. I mean, like you said, it's more than half the cost of IATAN. But I recall it's about 8.9, almost 9 million a year. And NC2 escalates over time. It starts, you know, now around 1.3, 1.5, and it goes up to over 2 million a year. So, I mean, fundamentally, that does not go away, but you can work on financial tools to help reduce the risk.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, you know, to answer your direct question, yes, we would recommend both the analysis of the market and getting together with your financial advisors to understand the impacts on this near term and long term.
Okay. And about how much are those bonds or that outstanding debt right now?
That is,
I may have that.
let me
look.
Oh, that's okay. We can go on, but if you can kind of put that as a note on the side there, Don, to
sure
follow up on, is, you know, what are the bonds outstanding on that? But I think that's such an important key for us, because I think that may be one of the biggest risks for IPL is the financial risk they have in those long-term contracts. And if in fact those contracts, for a lack of a better word, fail, because it's an investment on our part, and if they stop paying and if they stop performing, and we can't have, you know, the anticipation was we'd make the investment and we'd make enough money off of it to pay for the investment and also meet our demands for 103 megawatts combined with both of those contracts. Now, if those close early due to environmental regulations or just the cost of the market, and I think that's an important question too, is the two questions there are the environmental question and then the cost of the market, if I'm hearing you correctly.
That's correct. That's a very good summary.
Okay. I'm just making a note real quick here.
It looks like, and I'm just estimating, that the outstanding principal looks like it's about 113 million, 114 million for IATAN, and NC2 is about 79 or 80 million.
Yeah.
But I can.
And are those your 2023 numbers, Heather, or are those your 2024 numbers?
I mean, it's ballpark. We don't need to get
Oh,
down to
okay.
the pennies of it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I will follow up and send you that in writing.
So I heard the first one was 80 million roughly. Heather, what was the other one?
It's about 100. It looks like 113, 114 million. And my guess is it's the 2020. I can tell you real quick. I think it's 2023 numbers.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, we've got around $260, $270 million in debt for IPL. And these two together make up probably easily 2/3 to 70% of that, if I'm correct. I could be wrong, and I just wanted to verify that in my mind.
It's a good chunk of it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would say that's the majority of it.
Yeah. And these are 2023 outstanding amounts from 2023 going forward. So you could subtract the current year and it'd be a little bit less.
Okay.
Just an FYI for everybody on here, the ITN2 bond issuance was reissued within the last 6 months. So there'll be new debt numbers because it lowered all of our payments, and there was savings associated with all the members because that is through the Missouri Electric Commission. We are joint. Actually, we are 50% of that project.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Joe. And yeah, I think it'd be important for us to set up a meeting and follow up a little bit on this debt, the debt loads. Another one is, how do we reduce the regeneration cost, which are higher than our? Yes.
Just a comment. I'm sure city staff knows exactly what that is, and they should be able to just send that to us. Those balances.
Oh, true.
They can just
Absolutely
send it to us in email. So I don't think that's necessary to have another meeting.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say another meeting, just a follow-up email.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to do another meeting of this extent, but it's such an important aspect of because if we lose these, if these contracts expire, the debt load that we have, and then what do we generate, and then we've got to come up with another $100 million or 100 million megawatts of power, that's a pretty significant constraint.
I would agree.
And so I think, so let me ask you a bigger question. Looking at IPL from a broader perspective, what are the 3 most important things that you think we should do as elected officials to oversee this this utility?
I think the top 3 from our strategic plan would be to address. We would recommend, if we can recommend, we would
absolutely.
We would recommend that you set up an independent board empowered to oversee IPL of appointed officials from the council, giving them the power to set rates, to monitor its financials, and then whatever best suits the City of Independence as to the council's role in finally approving those rates or approving the budget or some mechanism, but that you have a full-time dedicated citizen-run effort to oversee the board, similar to the City of Springfield. I think that would be number 1. Number 2 would be to increase the financial transparency of IPL to give them more control over the finances and seeing what's reported and what their budgets are, so they can find opportunities to save money in running the utility. And I guess the third one I would say would be to come up with an integrated resource plan that says how you're going to meet the generation challenge for 3 reasons. One is economic growth, one is physical or contractual hedge against the early closure of coal plants, and on the third reason being to meet the changing requirements of the SPP market. Those would be my top three. I don't know. Heather?
Well, if I can
ahead.
jump in here, Heather, I don't mean to be disrespectful, please, but I'm trying to understand this. So integrated resources, coal, SPP, what was your number one there, Don? And hopefully
my number, for the three reasons for additional generation.
Yeah, integrated resources.
Economic growth, to support economic growth for the City of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you limit your economic growth to 15 megawatts, which is still considerable power, but with the changes going on in the marketplace, like if you were to want to have a data center, that wouldn't get the job done. So economic growth, a physical hedge against or contractual hedge against early closure of the coal plants, and the third reason is to meet the changing resource requirements within SPP.
Okay, and if I'm correct, last year, probably 70–80% of all new generation was either solar or wind investments, if I'm correct.
Pretty close.
Not higher.
Yeah, yep. That is correct. The issue with solar and wind in general is that it's very cheap energy. It is very cheap electricity, but the accredited capacity that comes along with it is not as robust as what comes with thermal generation. So if there is economic growth in SPP, and we see this in PJM today, somebody's going to have to build more generation and more thermal generation. And it is probably going to be, in my opinion, it's either going to be gas plants or it's going to be nuclear plants. The nuclear plants are probably a longer way off, but somebody's going to build gas.
Okay.
And I can tell you from my work in SPP, what they're seeing is there's some gas in the queue, some gas generation in the queue, but the predominance is, wind. And the way I know this is because of the transmission that they're looking to try to build to support the new generation. Most of it's, wind, some solar, but there is some gas out there. I don't know that it'll be enough, and I don't know on the timing of when it's all going to be available. But most of my work's in ERCOT, and I see that in ERCOT also. It's pretty consistent across the country. Wind and solar and batteries are really the biggest number, but there is gas. People are promoting and trying to develop thermal units out there. I just don't know if it's going to be enough quick and soon enough, I should say.
Right, because these data centers are the issue that's coming around the country. They're taking so much electricity, if I'm correct with my assessment.
Yeah.
Correct.
And what they're doing, we've got a lot of it in Texas, is if they can't get the generation quick enough, they're doing what's called behind the meter, and that they're contracting with transmission companies to connect directly to them and to renewable resources. A lot of them are building their own solar and battery storage to help support that, but they have to be connected to the system because battery and solar aren't 100% all the time.
Absolutely. No, that's perfect. Thank you very much. And I think that requires us as a council to delve into those issues in greater depth. And I'm so glad that our director of IPL is on, because I have tremendous confidence in him, and he will get that information to us. So can
I add just another?
Absolutely.
Priority? Sure. And I agree with everything that Don said. I think resources and getting an integrated resource plan that understands your potential future needs, the market, pricing, and what resources are available. You have to look at all those, and it all has to tie into what you can afford. That's a huge piece. The transparency and the communication is huge, but I think the other part that wasn't mentioned, and I think it's inherent in these, is technology. It would be very hard to delve into the other areas of, making IPL more efficient, being more customer centric, potentially, taking it to that next level, maintaining its high level of reliability without an investment of technology. And it's not just AMI, but there are systems that are there. They just aren't utilized to their highest benefit, and they're not integrated. And so it's a combination of new technology and really upgrading and leveraging the existing technology to get the highest benefit for IPL. Because you're going to need efficiencies to be able to shift resources to other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me a little bit. You've mentioned the concept of transparency in the financial records in greater detail. You talked about that at the first meeting, but of course that was so much data and so much information all at once. What do you mean by transparency with financial records of IPL? Kind of delve into that and take as much time as you need. I really need to understand this.
Sure. Well, the PUAB and you all as council should be getting regular financial statements on the performance of the utility. You have budgets. I'm sure you get budget to actual, but what's really important is both the staff of IPL have line of sight all the way through the numbers at a level of detail they can make decisions and control the outcomes. We talk to managers, and again, this is not finding fault with anyone. What we really believe is there's a lack of resources. We talk to managers about their costs because their costs came from the city or their budget. And I said, so what's your budget from this operation? And they said, we don't know. And I said, do you know how you're doing with respect to your budget? And they said, we really don't know. We're just doing our best to figure out how to make this work. And so my sense is that I'm sure someone knows, but the people that can impact the decisions and need to make decisions aren't seeing what their budget is and how they're doing on a regular basis and where they may need to pivot. So what that means is that you all, and I don't know if you get it monthly or quarterly, the governing bodies need to see, and the public needs to see where's the money going, what's coming in, where's it going, and what are you getting for that? So are there specific goals and targets for certain things that need to be done? How is that being reported? And where's the accountability? Because the public, we heard early on there's a lot of distrust because of the history of things that had happened. And when you lay it out, and so when things were presented, I heard, we don't believe the numbers. We don't believe what people are telling us. We don't, it's too technical. And so when you start laying out the numbers on a regular basis and say, okay, here's what we have, and here's what we did with it, and this is what you got for that. And we are staying true to our budget. We're staying true to our goals or performance measures. And you can see that. And then you can also see, look, here's where we have problems. We just had a major weather event. Our reserves were not adequate to cover the cost to restore power. So here's where we need to go. And I heard a lot of complaints about, IPL's not spending their capital budget. Well, we all know that most utility projects are multi-year projects. But when I was reviewing budget documents, it would just say, okay, here was the budget, here was spent, here's what we got, what we have left over, and it shows a really big amount. What it didn't show is what were the carryovers and what were the status of those projects. I think people would feel a lot better about that capital budget if they could see at a high level key projects. This is a 5-year project. So yes, you're going to have, 2/3 of the budget unspent in year 2, and being able to show it in it's a little bit more granular, but it gives a better picture of why the capital budget appears to not be spent, when in fact for that year it may be being spent, but it's a multi-year budget. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that's one thing we need to do on our general budget too, is to be able to see what did we spend last year compared to this year. And I think that's a great question. But what I heard you say is we need to see regular financials from IPL with regards to probably just what's their net income for the quarter, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's really what came in and from what sources, because I know one of the questions dealt with their transmission revenue, which is important, it's significant. And so looking at what's driving the revenue and then what's driving the cost. You'll see when wholesale power rates go up or fuel costs go up, you'll see higher costs for power. You'll see higher revenues. And but you want to understand the drivers of the revenues, and you want to see the drivers of the cost. And even just seeing the cost at a high level, you know, anything from generation, transmission, distribution, what goes to the city allocation of overhead. I mean, just kind of, you know, pretty high level, but it gives you a picture of what's going on. Because as you saw in the report, IPL is pretty frugal. Everything is comparable or less than the benchmarks, but except for the generation. And on some level, as we know, there's not much that can be done about that in the short term.
Okay. No, that was excellent. That's a great overview and great information on that. So thank you. But what you're really saying is this: if we're going to run an efficient and effective utility, we've got to have the transparency with the financials and see those quarterly reports, see the financials, see the net income, see what our capital expenditures are, and really see that in a pretty simple way in order for us to be able to make financial decisions going forward, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. I cannot say thank you enough. That's excellent.
Sure.
Okay. I'm going through and we've covered some of these earlier, so obviously we're not going to cover all of them, but
and Mayor, just for your benefit, I have the luxury. I am on a board of directors for a utility, and so a lot of my perspective comes from being a board member and what I see or need to see to make the decisions I make. I've also served a board as an executive and had to give them information. So sometimes I may get into too much detail. I may be very, you know, financially oriented, but that's my orientation. And I try to always think of things. What does a board member want to see, or a city council?
No, absolutely. And when you mentioned this in the first meeting, that really perked my ears. And I didn't want to talk about that in that meeting, but I just think it's so important that we talk about the transparency and the financial viability of the utility. And if we don't have a really clear picture, then it's like, you know, driving in fog without headlights and no windshield wipers, going, hey, how do we get there? That could be too extreme, but yeah, those are great questions and great things for us to look at. So perfect. Thank you very much. So what are the options the city has to secure additional capacity? You know, if we do in fact lose the 2 contracts from the coal in the next 10 to 15 years, you know, that's 103 megawatts. That's extremely difficult to replace. We just had an RFP recently asking for, and I don't know if Don and Heather, if you're familiar with that, but we were asking for additional capacity, and we only got like 50 megawatts in the entire market. So, you know, if we did face that kind of a crunch, what realistically are our options of getting additional capacity if those plants do prematurely retire?
Well, as you're well aware, in SPP, there are 2 ways to get capacity. You either do it through a bilateral contract with an existing generator, or you own generation. So your options are to build to increase ownership in a plant like Dogwood, or to buy into another existing gas plant, or to just contract for capacity as you do with Oneta. The wrinkle is that it takes 4 to 6 years through the normal interconnection process to build. So with that scenario, you have to commit to it early, and do the necessary interconnection studies and the necessary work to get capacity. When those plants do lose capacity, everyone who's taken capacity from those plants is going to be scrambling to identify additional capacity in the market. So we would assume the price of capacity at that point in time is going to increase dramatically. And the last point I would make is, if you do decide to build, or if you do decide to increase ownership in another plant, you don't necessarily have to do it alone. There are other utilities, other municipal utilities, that are going to be in the same boat you are, who are going to be looking for capacity. But those are pretty much your options.
Okay, perfect. That's excellent. I want to get an understanding of that and see what kind of pressures are we going to have an impact on that. The other one is our transmission congestion fees, which currently generates about $5.2 million annually. What are the scenarios where we might lose that revenue source? And this is a simple one. I don't want you to take more than a minute or two on this one, but it's just a pretty simple question.
Right. Yeah. If you go to an alternative ownership scenario, we don't think you would get those revenues from the wholesale market. So one, you would lose those revenues, which are probably offset against your total electric. So your total electric costs would go up by $5 million, and then you'd also lose the pilot that you're charging on that $5 million. So you'd lose an additional $500,000 to your pilot fund.
Okay. So one of the things that you did in the study was you compared our revenue versus megawatts, and compared, saying that correctly? From a cost standpoint.
We compared your total revenues to your kilowatt hour sales. That's true.
Okay.
And that's where IPL was high compared to the two IOUs and Springfield.
Okay. And from a percentage basis, how much higher are we, other than those three peers, in that? It'd be what, 10%, 5%? What's your thoughts?
I think you were at 14, and the next one was at like 12. So, okay. But I will say, that's a point in time from your 2023 financial statements. There are currently rate increases on the table for Evergy West, and there will probably be additional rate increases in the IOU space, because they have the same issues that IPL is facing, that to meet the changing rules in SPP, they're going to have to find additional capacity. And they're also being inundated with requests from entities like data centers who need additional capacity, and they don't have it right now. Your advantage of being a municipal utility, if you choose to execute it, is you can operate a lot faster than the regulated utilities. If you make decisions and develop a plan and have the resources, you can move faster than they can.
Okay. No, I think that's perfect. Excellent. Okay. And so,
and just
go ahead.
To build on it, sorry. I think in Don or mine's report, we talked about that over time, I think we would start projecting rate increases would be needed in 2028, I think, and it starts at 2%, and there's a blip further out, and I think it's tied to AMI, but over time, even because most of your rate increases would be between 2 and say 7% at the most, those are still less than the IOUs will probably experience. And so over time, I think Don shows this in his report or talks about it, is the rates will begin to align. They will be coming up, and so you'll see less of a gap. And it can, if you stay on track and really look at the financial strategy, and still make sure you're doing what you need to do, the IPL could get in alignment with the others.
Okay. It'd just be a matter of time.
Timing. Yeah.
And that follows up with another great question from the perspective of, and here I am raising my questions, but I think it's an important question for citizens. The question of, you had talked in the report, and correct me if I'm wrong, kind of an incremental increase in rates over time rather than just big jumps. Can you expand upon that a little bit? Because that's so important for our ratepayers.
And I think Don and I both have seen this. You can do a couple of things. If you have a long-term outlook, especially if you're embarking on a major capital plan, like having to build or buy generation or putting an AMI, you can say, okay, over time, at the end of the day, we're going to need to increase rates to this level. And historically, a lot of times utilities would wait until the projects were complete, and especially regulated, just because that's, whereas I've seen public power say, okay, we know by this date we're going to have rates at this level. So why not each year, let's look at maybe a 2% increase versus having that huge one at the end, and we build up a reserve that will help offset the costs that come online at that point. And it's called, I think what I've seen is, it used to be called a rate stabilization fund, where you build that, in essence, reserve to help compensate for those significant increases, peaks and valleys in costs. And there's different thoughts on that. But I know when you're looking to try to stabilize your rates to your constituents, that's one thing for sure. You'd want to sit down with your financial analysts, and build the model to really look at that, because I think that's helpful. And we have clients that actually, they have a built-in, what is it, Seattle, Don, that does an automatic, sort of basically almost a cost of living increase. And the only time the council or anyone gets involved in rate approvals is if it goes beyond that.
Yeah, they take the conversation of rate increases off the table by tying it to the CPI, and then the city is able to influence the budget of Seattle City Light through approving its budget and approving the mostly the staffing function. They exert their influence that way.
Okay. No, I think that's a really interesting idea for us to consider, is that incremental cost, putting that money aside, being prepared for an infrastructure agreement. But it would all depend on the appetite of my colleagues on the council, and obviously the appetite of the community. So very, very good. That's excellent. Okay. One of the things that the report talked about is our IPL's distribution and transmission system. Did you look at the age of our system compared to other systems? And Heather, you're shaking your head yes, so you were already ready for this one. Help me understand that. Are we ahead of the curve, behind the curve? Where are we at on average usage? Are we an older system, newer system? What do we need to do in order to make sure our infrastructure system is set up adequately and correct?
Yeah, we had Bar Engineering go out and look at the system, and they were led by one of IPL's engineers, and we assessed what it would cost to replace components, and then we looked at how old those components were. And we were very pleasantly surprised. The system is in very good shape, and the system is younger than we thought it was. So you are putting in the proper amount of capital into the distribution system and the transmission system per your current plans. It's not going in there, I mean, my experience is looking at old military electric distribution systems and other distribution systems, and those are in very sad shape. You are not. You have a well-run system, and that is what is reflected in your reliability numbers.
Yeah,
No, and
to
that's,
build,
go ahead.
sorry, to build on that, our engineers looked at what would the construction plan need to look like going forward. And so in the strategic plan, they built on what was already there, and they said that looked good. They would, I think someone asked me a question about undergrounding. They did accelerate some of the undergrounding. It's not a lot, but more undergrounding, each year. Plus, the one thing I think that was the big difference is they recommended an additional transformer to be bought sooner versus later. But we incorporated all of that into our financial projections, and it wasn't drastically different. It just had a few timing and a few extra things. But overall, supporting Don's comment, they felt really good about what was being done in the plans.
Excellent. No, that's good to hear, and that gives us comfort and confidence. So that's excellent. And from the numbers in your report, the reliability of the system is very good. The IPL staff keeps us up. Our uptime numbers were much better than the peers, almost twice as good when I did the comparison through the report. Am I kind of correct on that we're that much better than our competitors with regards to uptime and reliability?
Yeah. I think that's a fair statement, comparing yourself to the IOUs and the other neighboring utilities in your area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're in the top 1% of utilities nationwide.
Wow. Did you hear that, Joe?
Yes, sir. I've got some awards on the wall for that, for you guys. So.
Yeah, so I think Don should say that again. What was the number? Where's Joe's utility at in relation to that nationwide?
Nationwide, you're in the top 1%.
That's remarkable. So, Joe, please tell your staff, great job. You know that, but I just wanted to see that remarked again. That's a great thing, and that gives us a great confidence going forward. And this actually brought up the next one, electric reliability, or the questions I had sent you. And obviously, I'm not going to go through all of those because a lot of them you've handled already. You talked about this a little bit when you did your presentation the other day. I think this is important. And I'm going to read the question I had written and then kind of expand upon it. What are the potential long-term challenges associated with IPL's reliance on manual outage reporting, and how can this be mitigated, and what recommendations do you make changes so that we're more up-to-date, more current?
I mean, I think correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but I think our answer to that was more automated information, AMI infrastructure. One, from the perspective of safety. And also it will improve your awareness of outages. You'll be able to distribute more accurate outage maps to your customers and things like that. And I also think technology would help provide circuit maps to linemen in the field and things like that. That comes to the addresses the safety issue as well and makes them more efficient.
Okay.
And I think,
excellent.
To build on that, what's important too is, the data coming in. We gave the example of people calling in, and depending on what number they called into, whether it got directly into the system, whether the correct address was reflected, and having the tools to be able to identify the location and not rely on the phone number being called from as the only source of where the outage is would also help from a customer service and from an efficiency and response. And as we did mention, and you probably have heard it ad nauseum, AMI really addresses that because it can identify where the outage is and more directly versus just sort of going out and a shotgun approach and trying to find the source of that outage.
Okay, which then has an impact on our uptime of because we can find it quicker, then it makes our reliability numbers better.
Yep.
That's a great point. What percentage of utilities nationwide have AMI? What are you seeing? And I'm talking about they don't have to have because obviously you can't have the full thing boom overnight because it's quite an investment. But what percentage of utilities have at least started the process and have got it on the books and they're actually planning for that long-term project?
My take is, I think almost every utility in Texas probably has it because that we were required to. I would say at least 70%. I don't know, Don, what's your thought?
I was going to say that as well. I mean, we can I'll follow up and get you that number, but
no, it's not that important.
It's at least 70%.
More do versus not.
And that was my basic thought of it, but I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, and that's why I'm asking all of these questions because I just simply don't know.
Sure.
And so I cannot say thank you enough for being on here. I'm so glad that Councilmember Fears is on here too, to get a sense of, to hear this again, what do we need to do and how do we go about it? What are some of your recommendations to reduce generation cost and operational costs for this utility?
Our biggest recommendation to reduce generation costs is to address and the utility in general is to address the way the debt is structured, or try and accelerate your debt payments. We think that you're paying it's your principal and interest payments on I-10 2, Nebraska City 2 that are making you more or are less competitive than your peers. And in general, in the utility, for example, the 2016 bonds, I don't know what happened in 2016 when those were issued, but it's interest only for a considerable amount of time. And I think you first start paying, and you're paying 1.7 million a year in interest till from 2016, I think, to 2038, if my memory serves me right.
Good Lord.
So you could be more aggressive, I think, in general in the way that debt is approached, and convert that into savings for the utility and savings for the ratepayers. And I don't think anyone's to blame for this, but the board tasked with running IPL, and one of its vision statements was to make you cheaper than the IOUs. I think there would be a sharper focus on IPL debt.
Don, one question regarding the debt is, given where we're currently anticipating some reductions in interest rates over the next few months. Doesn't it make sense to wait a little bit to see where that goes before we really dive into that?
I mean, I think it would be good to start conversations. I mean, when some of this debt was taken out, you probably got it at very low interest rates. So the consideration will be, one, could you match that interest rate or beat it? And two, is what are the terms? A low interest rate that's interest for a long, long time is right. Not as beneficial. I mean, I would set, try and establish your blueprint, gain a organizational understanding of where you are in that space, and help you set your plans. I mean, I think, working with your financial advisors and things like that, and trying to get more aggressive and saying, if we do this, if we save this money, what would we do with it? What would it mean in terms of being able to more cheaply invest in AMI, more cheaply invest in generation, or provide a rate relief to our customers.
So what I hear you saying is we could do a fair amount of preliminary work before we decide to pull the trigger, you know.
Right.
At that point.
Right.
All
I
right.
mean, we did not get into the, we did not get into the detailed terms of, as we assume that this can be accelerated, we assume it can be repaid, we could assume it can be refinanced. I think all that needs to be verified.
And
but
that's what you pay PFM for. I mean, I've worked with them for years, and that is their, bailiwick, is looking at your structure and how can they, if you have specific strategic financial objectives, how can they create that space? And then telling you when it's time or not, because they don't really necessarily make money whether they do a bond issue or not. Their job is to advise you on what's the best financial strategy.
And to follow up a little bit, since we're talking about finances and things like that, can you send me a recommendation of key performance measures for utilities around the country so that we can kind of compare our key performance matrices to theirs and see if there's anything that we need to? I'm sure we have those and we probably match up perfectly, but just from a curiosity standpoint, would that be easy for you to do, or would you recommend to me look online to see a place to get that information?
We do a lot of that work, so I think we will be able to pull some. And you want it in all areas. The one thing we typically recommend is at a high level, you don't want more than 5 to 10, but you can take those down to a lower level, where down to actual departments, which the organization could do. But financial metrics, the standards are always debt service coverage, your capitalization ratio, your liquidity, reserves, reserve balances. I mean, those are the pretty simple ones. Of course, your budget to actual performance is pretty important. And those all are very important from the perspective of what rating agencies look at, and for your stability. You've got you all already measure your reliability indices. Something that we don't see, performance metric, transmission, its reliability, things like that.
We can send a list of key performance measures, and I would also recommend, through your membership in APPA, they have a wealth of performance measures and benchmarking with other public power entities, and that is readily available through
their membership,
through Joe's department and your membership. And there's a wealth of information there to help you see where you stand. But we can also send you an independent list.
No, that sounds great. And that's one of the things I'll ask the city manager, hey, what can we get from APPA? Find out what are the key measures. Obviously, Councilmember Fears and myself, we don't need to see the 50, but the key 10, as you were saying, Heather, earlier, on a quarterly basis would be a great indicator. And then obviously to trend and graph it over time to see the financial health of the utility is what I'm hearing you say.
Yep. And benchmark.
Perfect. Absolutely right. And then, what benchmarks we need. And I know Joe's got all of that, but, we as a council haven't asked for it. So that's a really important question. You also talked about the importance of adding additional staff. What do you mean there, and what are the key indicators, and how important on a scale of 1 to 10 is that for us to do? I know that's a lot of questions, but just talk about the importance of that, and who do we need to add?
As we talked about,
if I could interrupt, there's a schedule on that, Rory, in the appendix that really goes into a lot of detail on exactly what that is. So I think that would be, take a look at that.
Okay.
And at a high level, as we talked about, a big priority is transparency and understanding your financial numbers. IPL, I think when we did our first set of work a few years ago, had a dedicated financial analyst person who was sort of the liaison between the city and the utility, that could work with the managers, that could get the reports, could do the analysis. I think a financial analyst is key. I think someone who can support the rate strategies and analysis. You have one person that does it, and he's great. He knows everything, but what if something happened to him? I mean, there's no backup. Nobody knows what he knows. And I think as you move forward and looking at different rate structures, you know, that person's going to need some help. We talked about communication, someone who is dedicated to IPL and looking at the different mediums and really be communicated in plain English that folks will understand. Technology support. Those are the big ones that jump out at me from memory. Don, did I miss anything?
No,
But
just
those are
over time as you develop your commercial and industrial base, it would be useful to add a what are called key account managers or
right.
liaisons to industry. And when you have room to maneuver in your rates, you know, to develop some more some more competitive economic development rates to attract even more industry. And that can be done through key account managers.
And the challenge obviously is if we were to give a new customer a lower rate as an enticement, you know.
Oh, right. You have to be, you have to be transparent and fair. But I mean, it's also a rate class issue at how is utilities, how are they using energy? For example, a data center would not expect the same rate design that a residential home and that's just the way they're going to be using their energy. So much more energy intense. So, what is fair that they pay for the infrastructure, make their contribution to the community, but maybe when you look at it on a cents per kilowatt hour, it seems less expensive than what a homeowner's paying on a cents per kilowatt hour.
Okay.
And the other thing is when you do an economic development rate, the best way to help the public understand is the city gets something in return. And as you know, economic development is a holistic approach between the city, the Chamber of Commerce, the potential customer, and the utility. And so what can you get out of that customers? Because cities offer, tax deferrals, discounts on rates, but in return, they ask for an assurance of you're going to be with us how many years, how many jobs you will bring, what are you going to add to the tax roll? So it's got to be a balanced negotiation. What may appear to be a big discount or rate inequity may actually, in fact, be offsetting some major costs. And, if you bring more people in, then that, again, also offsets the cost and you have more people to pay for the infrastructure.
Yep, no doubt. Perfect. And that's the whole goal with the development of the valley. I'm just going through my questions because I'm not going to ask you all of them. So, and then how long did the two of you plan? I was thinking maybe 90 minutes, but when did you, if you've got something at the top of the hour, I'll jump off.
Oh, no, we have it booked for 2 hours.
We're here. Yeah, we're here for the duration.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And I cannot say thank you enough for your time and your expertise and the information that we're getting and helping us make decisions about how do we utilize our utility in a more effective way.
Well, that was our goal.
Yeah, good. I wanted to follow up and really get into the details. And I didn't want to take everyone's time the other night out of a sense of respect to my colleagues and everyone that was there. But we certainly want to record this to make it available to the public so they get a sense of transparency and accountability that we are driving this forward in a productive and in a positive manner. So obviously we talked about this earlier, and the financial strategy is really looking at the bond and the bond debt and see how we restructure that debt and see what the impact would make on the ratepayers, but also the impact it would make on our ability to put money aside for long-term investment is kind of what I'm hearing you say from a general sense in this report.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mayor, I might ask a few questions while you're
Absolutely,
kind of
fire away.
there.
Absolutely, sir.
So, I was really intrigued by your governance discussion, the white paper on that, and how that might change things for us. I guess a couple of questions, follow-up questions in that regard. You said you've seen, boards anywhere from 5 to 11, I think is what you said. And my question really is there a sweet spot that you have seen that you think works the best, or what's your thoughts?
I think I've seen them as big as 15. I think that's unwieldy. It's very hard to get a consensus and focus when you have that many. I think between 5 and 7 is
Okay.
a good, because you want to be able to have conversation and get everybody on board, and you want to be able to build consensus and understanding. And I don't know, Don, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think where you are right now, smaller is better because you're in a position where you want to make some decisions, and smaller boards can make quicker decisions, I think. You also, have to increase the size of the board, so 5 to 7, because when you would first set it up, you'd want to have overlapping terms so all the experience on the board doesn't disappear at once. So, you know, some members might be appointed for a year, some members may be appointed for 4 years, and then you get into a rhythm where maybe everybody's appointed for 4 years or 3 years or whatever you decide. So that's the way I would think it would start up.
And for us, a change of that nature involves a charter change, and so I think we're down the road a bit for this. But I do think it's important. In fact, we have on the agenda tonight at our study session to talk about a resolution that actually ask the city manager to governance and things of that nature. All that's good. I guess, what would maybe be helpful a little bit is if you have, and maybe you don't, maybe we just need to go to the different boards and obtain information. But if you have any framework of what you think works best, and especially I'm thinking of different types of people on boards like that we have kind of categories of people that we might try to obtain on the board with backgrounds in certain areas of expertise. That would be, if you have anything like that you could send us, that would be helpful.
Yeah. And I wanted just to interject, for you all to go to an independent board is a charter change, and that's a pretty heavy lift. And I gather from your questions, what you're really thinking about, what's a good transition? How can we take what we've got today and get as close to that prospect as possible? And I think what the question you just asked is probably the most important, is what you could do with what you have under your current charter is define the roles, the expertise. And we did a public, with Boulder, we did a public workshop over a series of months where we met with key members of the public to define what kind of folks did they want on the board. And we found out they wanted, because it was a university town, they wanted somebody that represented, the education sector. They wanted a business person. They wanted someone who represented the low income organizations that understood, the challenges they were facing. they wanted someone that had some sort of technical type utility background, or at least understood that. They even talked about potentially someone that had a background in regulatory issues. So it really, I think it's unique to the community, but those are some of the key fundamentals. And you know, we can send you some ideas, but I think if you start with looking at that, you start defining the terms, because I can't remember if the charter fixes the terms or you have the ability to do that yourselves. And I think overlapping where the terms of your advisory board do not tie to the terms of the council, that helps kind of take the politics out of it, because these people are not thinking about, they're going to have to work with whoever is on council. And so it's not that specific. The other part of that is what powers and trust. You could do a lot of what you need to do if, as a council, you defined what you were going to delegate to that board and where you were going to rely on them. Right now, I think from just an overview, while they're an advisory board, they are not included in decisions, or they're not asked for their advice on some key decisions. And then if they provide it, it's not, the council hasn't been comfortable with that, and so they've disregarded it. You will have a hard time getting really good qualified board members if you set out qualifications under that scenario. So without changing perspective of council and that relationship and the trust and reliance, those kind of folks will not want to be on your PUAB. So I think you have to do two things: redefine the way council relates to the board, as well as the qualifications, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's helpful. I agree with you. And I think we've taken a bit of a step doing that just by, we've done that with all our committees. We've created a liaison to all our committees, and that's just in the last few months. So that's a step in the right direction. But I think that's real helpful. A couple of other questions. In terms of the economic development piece of the puzzle, and how much of that piece do these boards lay on or do the boards take responsibility for, versus how much is in kind of the city's, bailiwick on that? Is it just a joint kind of endeavor?
I guess my question is, what do you mean? Do you mean defining economic development rates or strategies?
I'm looking at the strategies that the utility could use to be more of an economic development engine, and how much of that is laid on the board versus how much of that is on the city, side of things.
I think, ideally you would, that board would work with the leadership of the utility, who in turn is working obviously with the leadership of the city, to develop a strategy or a policy statement, because the board is at the strategic policy level. They're not making the detailed decisions. And that can give direction to Joe and his folks, as well as the city. But I think it takes, it's kind of one of those three-legged stools. It needs city leadership because they're part of that equation. It needs utility leadership, and it needs the oversight board to sit down and say, what direction do we want to go on this? And what would be our policy and strategy? And you want to make sure the policies are not prescriptive from the perspective of giving exact details how you do it. It's really setting goals and what parameters do they want the utility to work in when it comes to economic development. Do they only want the utility to be in the rate, or do they want to expand it with respect to services? and options. I mean, I think that's where the board can come in, the PUAB.
Okay.
And obviously, at the end of the day, all of that can be brought to council to just say, yeah, we bless this, or wait a minute, we need to think about this. We need to add this, or we're not comfortable with this.
Okay. I think I only have one other question, and it's on a completely different subject, and that is that in the report you stated that IPL must outsource EV charging infrastructure because it cannot meet cybersecurity requirements. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little more to that. I'm not understanding what the risks maybe are there and what's needed.
Don, you want me to take that, or you want to take it?
Go ahead. That was in your report.
Yeah. Because EV charging has a lot of technology involved, there are specific requirements from a technology security perspective. When you hook into the utility infrastructure, cybersecurity is the biggest risk right now that most utilities face. And so there is not the infrastructure and people and technology to support external things connecting to the system. And so that's really what that gets at. To meet requirements of having EV charging stations connected to the system, you want to have a very secure technology behind that. And so that's really what we're saying is you don't have the skills in-house, so bring someone in who can do that.
So you're saying it's not as simple as running power to a station is what I hear. I mean, I just assume you run the line to the station, you hook it up, and you're off and running. But apparently that's not the case.
No, it's more the information cybersecurity vulnerability where you've got this source connected both to your grid and to the internet, and malicious people with malicious intent look for any way to probe into these things, and it's better we think to outsource those type of things. You're going to have enough cybersecurity as you implement more and more DER and things like that in your system.
Right. Okay. All right. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Great questions, Councilmember. Well done. And I've got a couple of questions here, and then I'm going to follow up again on governance. So what was your biggest surprise you found in reviewing IPL? And I'd like both of you to take that one if you could.
I guess our biggest and most pleasant surprise was the condition of the system. And I would say another surprise was that the debt associated with the generation plants just seemed to be on automatic pilot. I mean, when the deals were done, as and in market conditions at the time, it was assumed that they would just pay their own way and things would move along. The market has changed under them, and we had to dig.
And you talked a lot about financial transparency, so that we've got to work on that. Okay, perfect. Heather, how about you?
I think the biggest surprise was, and this was through the interview process, is how much alignment there was from the staff all the way to the public, even the activists, on what needs to be done to fix IPL. I think it was really, to me, impressive when we had the strategic planning session with staff, how open and honest they were, and they're very dedicated. They really believe in what they're doing. But just the things that needed to be fixed, we just heard so many common issues. And that to me was surprising, because I had a sense going into it that it was a big disparity in everybody's perception. but it wasn't as big as you would think. So that was good, and that part of it made it easier to focus on priorities. The hard part was there were so many things, and I think for me, the downside was there were so many fundamental things to get to just where most utilities are today that needed to be fixed. It's not that unusual. I mean, I see it in others, but you know, we kind of laugh about this. And this tells you how long I've been doing it. I felt in some respects I'd step back to the 80s. And it's not anybody's fault. You don't know what you don't know, and you can only do what you can afford or what people have told you you can afford. But I was a little bit surprised just because, you know, in spite of all of it, IPL operates pretty well.
And you said there's just some fundamental things that you would see. You may have mentioned it earlier, but just to kind of reiterate on that, what were those fundamental things that, you know, as elected officials that we need to be aware of and need to spend some time on to address? So what were those?
Well, the financial situation that we've talked about, not understanding the financial implications or just getting the data. It was hard. I will say, again, not anybody's fault. There had been some major turnover and we had to rely on like maybe one or two people. But getting was a challenge at times. Not that they were hiding anything, it's just who knew how to get it and who knew how to answer a question. The technology, again, AMI is a big one, but also just I think you're on a version of Word that isn't even supported anymore. Or you know, your Office suite. I mean, just basic fundamental technology resources that are outdated or not integrated. Your customer service, there are some great programs that nobody knows about. And so that was kind of, and just, I think there wasn't a good communication strategy of how IPL lets their customers know the good things they're doing. And that's so important. In this world, no news is not good news. People will fill the gap. So those were kind of the fundamentals. Key accounts, you know, that's pretty fundamental. Regularly reviewing your financial plan and projections on what things look like going forward. Integrated resource plan, that's a pretty fundamental thing that you have to have. And regularly reviewing those plans and updating them to see if you're on track or what's changed. As Don referred to earlier, the industry's changed a lot. And you just have to stay on top of it. And it's not something you can do every 2 years. Again, it's nobody's fault. When you don't have the resources, you go with what you got. But those are some pretty basic things that you would expect. A human resource strategy, that to me, and I didn't talk about it enough, the industry's struggling to get good staff. And when you look at the numbers for IPL, the number of folks that are eligible to retire or that are retiring, and what is the plan to replace them? I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, you have 2 engineering positions that have been open for almost a year that you haven't been able to fill. So dedicated HR support, and I mean, all the utilities are doing this. This is not a unique situation for IPL. On how are you going to fill that gap? Whether it's figuring out how you partner with a local technical college, whether you have a recruiter that you are bringing on, you have to look at your salary structure and your benefit structure. What is it going to take? Because you're competing with the IOUs and other surrounding utilities for the same people, and it's in-state and out-of-state. Without a good human resource plan, you can do all the things we recommended, but if you don't have good people, it won't succeed.
Okay. No, excellent. Very, very good. And then I'm going to ask you this one again. What were your biggest concerns? It sounds like, Heather, you just answered that with regards to the fundamental changes and the fundamental things that you talked about. Don, would you have anything else, Heather, on that question?
Those are the big ones.
Okay. How about you, Don?
No, I would not add anything else to that. I would just say over the course of both our engagements with the City of Independence, the basic utility construct in both IOUs and in public power is that, there's a revenue requirement to run a utility as a business. And, you want that to be low enough so public power is supposed to be cheaper than regulated power. But the concept of, we have to have a certain minimum amount of revenue to run IPL, and what is that number, and understand that across the organization does not seem to have taken permanent root, I would say. I would say in the past we have seen, just decisions were made without any financial analysis at all and had material impact on the utility. I think understanding it and I think a board, be it a more robust PUAB, be it the council, has to understand it has to be run by a business, and there is a minimum revenue requirement. To say no every time there's a request for more revenue it is not a viable strategy. And you've been done remarkably well in doing this since 2012, but I think it's time to maybe develop a more for the organization, not individuals, but for the organization to develop a more mature outlook on what it takes to run an electric utility.
Okay. Thank you. That's terrific. And let me just look. The last section I had was governance, and I'll just look at that real quick if you'll just give me just a second on it. And I think Councilmember Fears handled that one pretty well, so I'm glad he was here and he handled that. And that way I wasn't the only one asking all the questions. So, Councilmember, I am glad that you did that, and I appreciate that. Anything else, Don or Heather, to wrap up? And then I'll turn it over to you, Jared, see if there's anything else that you'd like to add, and then go from there.
No, I don't think there's anything else to add. We have on our list to send key performance metrics and some recommended or what our experience has been in setting board quals. It's very encouraging, I think, that you're taking these steps. And when we say good job keeping the lights on, it's doing a good job providing good reliability. I think these are increasing the financial transparency, I think increasing technology, I think taking a long-term look and developing a plan for generation are all things that will benefit the city in helping its economic growth. And I think in all things, it will make IPL eventually be able to reduce rates. So you will not hear the refrain that we're higher than everybody else. I think that this is very encouraging.
Okay, perfect. No, I appreciate that very much. Councilmember Fears, anything to follow up with as we wrap up?
No, not really. Just a comment in that, I really just appreciate all the analysis and all the information. And I think our reasoning for wanting to do these studies was to get a better understanding of what it takes to, run a utility and move it forward for the next 20 years or so. And I think this has been extremely helpful in that, the question or the issues that you've raised about governance and operations and things of that nature and financial, those are the reasons, I think, in part why we asked for this. And so, you know, I think you've addressed those very well. Really appreciate the efforts, and I look forward to, you know, I know that Joe has a number of things in the works that he's already addressing as a result of this and other things that are going on. I think it's very apparent to me that IPL needs to take a more prevalent place in, you know, in terms of coming in front of the council for a variety of different things. And that financial analysis piece with additional financial analyst and hiring that one, to me, I mean, that's kind of where I live and breathe, but that's the most important piece of the puzzle in my view, at least at this point. Although the other ones are, you know, are very important as well. So anyway, I just appreciate the information. It's really given me a better groundwork, or a better framework for making decisions going forward. And I'm hopeful that we can take this and really build on it and make some strides in the direction we want to go.
Absolutely. Perfect. Joe, had anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I appreciated DKMT, all their support, digging into things, because it will help me. They've given me a big laundry list of things that we do need to accomplish. So kind of given me those next steps. And I think things you can see from me in the future would be an achievable implementation plan of the objectives that they've set out, right? So obviously we can't go achieve all the things that they've set out tomorrow, but we do need a plan and a time frame that is achievable for us. And so I'll be looking forward to discussing with council and PUAB what that looks, their subcategories in the reports. So that's all I got to say. I want to say thanks everybody for their support on this.
Absolutely. And I'm in agreement with Councilmember Fears here. What we need to put together is a game plan to make this a sustainable and reliable and productive utility going into the future. That's our question, and how do we get there is the ultimate question. And that's our task as council members, is how do we lead it going forward and to make sure it's reliable, sustainable, and a good resource for this community and a good resource for the citizens. So with that, unless there's anything else, we'll call this meeting adjourned. So I just going to say thank you, everyone, for attending. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye now.
Bye.